Chapter 1. Introduction. Fascination with the wonders of the ancient world. They have fascinated mankind for thousands of years, the 7 wonders of the ancient world. They are emblematic of a time when the great cultures of the Mediterranean and the Middle East shone not only with power and wealth, but also with the will to create monuments that went beyond the everyday. Wonders of the world. That sounds like something that reaches beyond human standards, like works that should challenge the heavens, honor the gods, or make the greatness of entire empires visible. Even the ancients did not speak of these buildings as ordinary buildings, but as manifestations of human creativity, technology, and hubris. But what made these buildings wonders of the world? Was it its sheer size, its magnificence, its technical mastery, or its symbolic value? It was probably a mixture of all that. The Great Pyramid of Giza, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, the Temple of Artemis in Ephesus, the statue of Zeus in Olympia, the Mausoleum of Halicarnassus, the Colossus of Rhodes, and the Lighthouse of Alexandria, each of them represents an empire, a culture, and an idea of greatness that resonates to this day. The idea of grouping such works together in a list does not come from modern times, but from antiquity itself. Even Greek scholars such as Herodotus or later writers such as Antipater of Sidon were looking for a selection of the largest buildings in their world. In a way, it was a travel guide for the elite of the time who traveled the well-known regions by ships and caravans. Anyone who had rank and name should have seen these miracles with their own eyes, or at least be able to report on them. It is noteworthy that the wonders of the world were not only about technology. They have always been an expression of religion, power, and identity. The pyramids were burial places for pharaohs and symbols of divine order. The Gardens of Babylon, whether they actually existed or not, embodied the dream of paradise on earth. The Temple of Artemis was not just a building, but a center of an entire belief system. The Zeus of Olympia was a work of art that at the same time evoked religious devotion. The Mausoleum of Halicarnassus was a tomb that was supposed to secure fame far beyond death. The Colossus of Rhodes was a political statement after a military victory. And the Lighthouse of Alexandria combined practical use with symbolic radiance. It was the light that showed travelers the way and at the same time announced Alexandria's greatness. The mixture of reality and legend is also fascinating. Of some of these miracles, we know quite well what they looked like, how big they were, who built them. For others, however, the information is fragmentary, overlaid with myths, embellishments, and later fantasies. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon are the most famous example. To this day, it is unclear whether they ever really existed, or whether they were more of a poetic image carried on by writers. It is precisely this mixture of historical reality and legend that makes the wonders of the world so fascinating. They are a mirror of human longings. The desire to leave traces, to create monuments that stand the test of time, runs through the history of mankind. But most of the wonders of the world have disappeared today. Wars, earthquakes, fires, and the transience of materials cause them to perish. Only the Great Pyramid of Giza defies the millennia to this day and gives us a direct impression of what the ancients achieved. But the memory remained, and it grew larger the more the buildings disappeared. Poets, historians, artists, and later archaeologists kept the image of the wonders of the world alive. They became symbols of a past greatness, memorials of human possibilities and limits. The fact that we still speak of them today shows how much they have become part of the collective memory. The 7 wonders of the ancient world are much more than just a list of ancient buildings. They are a story of ambition and reverence, of splendor and transience. They tell of how people tried to honor the gods, surpass nature, and overcome death. And they remind us that even the greatest works don't last forever, but the stories that are told about them do. In the next chapter, we will devote ourselves to the origin of this idea. How did it come about that people began to speak of wonders of the world in the first place? Which authors coined the term, and what significance did it have for the people of antiquity? Chapter 2. The idea of the wonders of the world. Origin and tradition. The idea of the 7 wonders of the world is now an integral part of our cultural memory. But who created this list in the first place, and why 7? To understand this, we must put ourselves in the shoes of the world of ancient Greece, an era in which travel, education, and admiration of extraordinary achievements were closely linked. The Greeks themselves were great travelers. Merchants, scholars, and adventurers roamed the eastern Mediterranean, visiting Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Asia Minor. On their travels, they came across buildings and monuments that were far larger, more magnificent, or more unusual than they knew from their homeland. So they began to highlight the most extraordinary of them and collect them in lists. The term the Greeks used for this was theaumata or thaumata, which means things that must be seen or miracles. So it was less about the supernatural in the modern sense, but rather about astonishing works of human art and technology. The origin of the classical list probably dates back to the 3rd century BC. During this time, there lived Antipater of Sidon, a poet who listed 7 such miracles in one of his writings. He spoke of the Pyramid of Giza, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, the Temple of Artemis, the statue of Zeus in Olympia, the Mausoleum of Halicarnassus, the Colossus of Rhodes, and the Lighthouse of Alexandria. This list prevailed and became the basis of our understanding today. Other authors made similar compilations, sometimes with variations, for example, the City Wall of Babylon or the Palace of Cyrus in Persia, but the 7 classics remained. The number 7 was no coincidence. In ancient times, it was considered a sacred, symbolic number that expressed perfection and harmony. It appeared again and again in astronomy, philosophy, and religion. 7 planets were known, 7 wise men were counted in the Greek tradition, and the lyre of Apollo had 7 strings. By identifying 7 wonders of the world, the list was given a special authority that went beyond mere arbitrariness. The wonders of the world were thus a kind of cultural guide. Anyone who was self-respecting should have seen it, or at least pretend to have it. At a time when travel was dangerous and arduous, reports of such places had a special appeal. They broadened horizons, combined knowledge with prestige, and made the world a larger, more fascinating space. It is interesting that these lists were always strongly Greek. While only one of the wonders of the world, the statue of Zeus, came directly from Greece, the selection reflected the perspective of Greek travelers who evaluated their surroundings according to their own standards. They admired Egyptian pyramids or Babylonian gardens, but interpreted them through their own cultural glasses. Thus, the wonders of the world became not only monuments of human greatness, but also symbols of a certain way of looking at the world. The transmission of the wonders of the world took place through texts, poems, and later by chroniclers of the Roman period. Many of these structures no longer existed when they were described. The Temple of Artemis, for example, was destroyed several times. The Colossus of Rhodes collapsed after an earthquake, and the Hanging Gardens remained the stuff of myths rather than concrete travel reports early on. But it was precisely the gap between reality and narrative that contributed to the fascination. The less tangible a miracle was, the stronger its legendary aura grew. In the centuries after antiquity, the list was not forgotten, even if knowledge of the exact places and forms dwindled. Medieval scholars and artists took up the idea, supplemented it with Christian interpretations, or used other buildings. In the Renaissance, interest was reawakened when ancient texts were rediscovered and the wonders of the world were made a symbol of past greatness. To this day, the list inspires archaeologists, historians, writers, and travelers looking for traces of the ancient giants. The idea of the wonders of the world is therefore more than a mere list. It shows how people have always tried to make the greatest achievements of their culture visible, to bring them into a symbolic order, and thus to make them immortal. It is an example of how memory works, not by simply preserving facts, by retelling, passing on, and reinterpreting stories. In the next chapter, we turn to the first and to this day only completely preserved wonder of the world, the Great Pyramid of Giza. It has stood in the desert of Egypt for thousands of years, defying wind, sand, and time, and still puzzles us today as to how people were able to build such a structure over 4,500 years ago. Chapter 3. The Great Pyramid of Giza. Construction, Technology, and Symbolism. When talking about the 7 wonders of the world, it is the most impressive and, at the same time, the most mysterious, the Great Pyramid of Giza. It is the only one of the ancient wonders of the world that still exists today, and it has survived over 4,500 years of wind, sand, erosion, and the weight of time. Even the ancient authors were overwhelmed by its size and precision, and to this day, it remains a monument that amazes researchers and travelers alike. The pyramid was built in the 26th century BC under Pharaoh Cheops, Khufu in Greek. It was originally over 146 meters high, so it remained the tallest structure of mankind for more than 3,800 years, until it was not until the Middle Ages that cathedrals such as those of Lincoln or Cologne surpassed this height. Its sheer size alone shows the technical and organizational masterpieces behind its construction. It is estimated that around 2.3 million stone blocks were used, some of them weighing several tons. The biggest question that has always arisen is, how did the ancient Egyptians build this structure? Even ancient scholars puzzled over ramps, levers, or secret machines. Modern archaeologists believe that a combination of inclined ramps, lever techniques, and enormous human manpower was used. Thousands of workers, presumably not slaves as was long assumed, but farmers who worked on the construction sites during the annual Nile flood, hauled, pulled, and positioned the stones. Recent excavations show that the construction workers lived in large camps, were well cared for, and formed a kind of community organized for this gigantic project. The precision of the construction is also remarkable. The orientation of the pyramid according to the cardinal directions is so precise that it still impresses engineers today. The base is almost perfectly square. The angles differ only minimally. One cannot help but wonder how a civilization could achieve such accuracy without modern measuring instruments. Some see this as evidence of knowledge that was far ahead of its time, but it is also possible to explain this precision with simple instruments such as strings, spirit levels, and astronomical observations. It was not so much magic as centuries of experience in building monuments that culminated here. The Great Pyramid was not just a tomb, but a symbol. She embodied the power and divinity of the pharaoh. In Egyptian religion, the ruler was considered the son of the sun god Ra, and the pyramid shape itself was understood as a connection between earth and heaven. Their shape is reminiscent of the sun's rays tilting towards the earth. Inside it, the pharaoh was to find the passage to the afterlife, accompanied by treasures, rituals, and the hope of immortality. The interior of the pyramid is as fascinating as its exterior. Corridors, chambers, and shafts run through the massive structure. The most famous is the so-called King's Chamber, which houses a massive granite sarcophagus. But no mummy of Cheops has ever been found. Whether it was plundered, destroyed, or never buried there remains a mystery. Recent research has also discovered cavities and previously unexplained structures inside, which may hold further secrets. The original site of the pyramid must also have been overwhelming. It was once clad in smooth limestone slabs that glistened in the sun like a giant mirror. From a distance, it must have looked like a radiant mountain of light, a monument that connected heaven and earth. Today, these claddings have largely disappeared as they have been removed over the centuries for other buildings. But even in its naked state, the pyramid impresses with its massiveness and aura. The effect on contemporaries was enormous. Even the Greeks who traveled to Egypt centuries later described it as an incredible building. Herodotus reported on this in detail, even if his statements were partly exaggerated or erroneous. Antipater of Sidon, who handed down the list of wonders of the world, called the pyramid a work that challenges heaven. And even today, in the age of skyscrapers and high tech, the pyramid remains an enigma that inspires humility. However, the symbolism of the Great Pyramid goes beyond Egypt. It became a symbol of human creativity, but also of transience. Because although the structure itself has survived, the stories and culture that produced it have been lost in the flow of time. For many, it is proof that man strove to create eternity from an early age, and that this striving only ever succeeds in part. The Great Pyramid is thus not only the first wonder of the world, but also the most enduring. It alone gives us a direct impression of what the ancient authors had in mind when they spoke of wonders of the world. It is a testimony of power, religion, technology, and ambition turned into stone. In the next chapter, we want to broaden our view and look not only at the monument itself, but at the world in which it was created, at ancient Egypt, its culture, its society, and its everyday life, without which this miracle would never have been possible. Chapter 4. The Pyramid of Giza. Everyday life in ancient Egypt. To truly understand the significance of the Great Pyramid of Giza, it is not enough to consider it as a structure alone. You have to look at the Egypt in which it originated, an advanced civilization that had already developed an order and technical sophistication that was unparalleled over 4,500 years ago. The pyramid is not only a monument to Pharaoh Khufu, but also a mirror of the everyday life, society, and beliefs of the people who built it. Ancient Egypt was a land of the Nile. The great river shaped everything: the rhythm of the seasons, the richness of the fields, the organization of work. Every year, the Nile flood brought fertile mud that fertilized the fields anew. This rhythm determined the lives of the peasants, who formed the basis of society. During the months of the flooding, the fields could not be tilled, and it was precisely then that workers were available for large government projects, such as the construction of the pyramids. This explains why thousands of workers could be mobilized without the collapse of agriculture. The society of Egypt was strictly hierarchically organized. At the top was the pharaoh, who was not only considered a worldly ruler, but also the divine son of the sun god Ra. Under him stood officials, priests, and clerks who organized the administration. Scribes played a particularly important role because they mastered the complicated hieroglyphic script. They recorded taxes, documented harvests, and ensured that construction projects ran smoothly. Below them stood the great mass of farmers and craftsmen who laid the foundation for high culture with their work. Everyday life was simple despite the size of the monuments. Farming families lived in simple mud houses. Their diet was based on bread, beer, onions, and occasionally fish or meat. Clothing was usually made of linen, which was made from flax. Women ran the household, took care of children and animals, while men worked in the fields or did handicrafts in the workshops. Despite the hardships of life, there were also moments of joy. Festivals in honor of the gods, music, dance, and games were an integral part of the culture. Religion was omnipresent. The Egyptians believed in a variety of gods who were responsible for nature, fertility, death, and rebirth. The idea of the afterlife was particularly important. Death was not the end, but the transition to another existence. For this to succeed, rituals, sacrifices, and a grave were needed to accompany the deceased on his journey. The pyramid was therefore not simply a tomb, but a gateway to eternity, which was supposed to elevate the pharaoh into the company of the gods. The construction of the pyramid was therefore not only a technical project, but a religious one. Every stone that was set was an act of worship. The workers who built them saw their work not only as a constraint, but as a service to the gods and the empire. Archaeological finds from workers' camps in Giza show that these people were organized, fed, and provided with medical care. Bread, beer, and meat were on their menu, an indication that they were not treated like slaves, but as part of a huge state project. The pyramids were embedded in a larger religious and architectural ensemble. In addition to the pyramid proper, there were mortuary temples where sacrifices were made, walkways that led to it, and smaller pyramids for queens or important officials. The entire plateau of Giza was a sacred space, a place that expressed power and faith in equal measure. The art and symbolism of the Egyptians was also reflected in this everyday life. Hieroglyphics, murals, and statues tell of the lives of the people, their gods, and rituals. They show scenes of hunting and fishing, of festivals and sacrifices, but also of the work in the workshops. These representations were not just decoration, but had a magical purpose. They were to remain effective in the afterlife and provide for the deceased. This makes it clear that the Great Pyramid is not simply an isolated miracle, but the result of a society that was geared towards order, permanence, and harmony in all areas. It embodies the connection between religion, everyday life, and rule in a way that can still be felt today. When we stand in front of the pyramid today, we see not only the work of engineers and workers, but the condensed essence of an entire culture. It tells of life on the Nile, of belief in immortality, of the power of the pharaoh, and of the ability of a society to join forces to create something seemingly impossible. In the next chapter, we leave Egypt and turn to a miracle that may never have existed in this form, and yet it's one of the most famous: the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, a paradise between myth and reality. Chapter 5. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon, Myth or Reality? Of all the wonders of the ancient world, none is as mysterious as the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. While the pyramids of Giza can still be admired today, and at least archaeological traces of other wonders have been preserved, the gardens are still a mystery today. Did they really exist, or are they a product of poetic imagination? This question has occupied historians and archaeologists for centuries and makes the Hanging Gardens one of the most fascinating chapters of the ancient wonders of the world. The first question that arises is, what exactly are these gardens supposed to have been? Ancient authors such as Strabo or Diodorus of Sicily described it as a huge complex in which trees, shrubs, and flowers grew on terraced steps high above the ground so that they seemed hanging. Water is said to have been directed upwards via sophisticated irrigation systems to make the plants bloom in the hot and dry landscape of Babylon. It was a picture of paradisical beauty, a green oasis in the middle of the barren steppe of Mesopotamia. The story that the gardens were built by King Nebuchadnezzar II in the 6th century BC is particularly popular. He is said to have given it to his wife Amytis, who came from the green mountains of Media and missed the flat, dry landscape of Babylon. The gardens would therefore have been a proof of love, a monument to private feelings that nevertheless became a wonder of the world. This romantic tale shaped the imagination of many generations and gave the miracle a human dimension. But as beautiful as this story is, its historical basis is uncertain. Neither the extensive Babylonian cuneiform texts nor the archaeological excavations in Babylon provide clear evidence of the existence of the gardens. Babylon itself, located on the Euphrates, was undoubtedly a glamorous city with magnificent palaces, temples, and the famous city walls. But the local sources are silent about the Hanging Gardens. This is astonishing because if they had really existed, the Babylonians themselves would have had to mention them. Some researchers therefore suspect that it is a mix-up. Perhaps the gardens were not in Babylon at all, but in Nineveh, the capital of the Assyrian Empire. There are reports of elaborate gardens under King Sennacherib in the 7th century BC. Relief depictions actually show terraced buildings with vegetation and aqueducts that resemble the descriptions of the Greek authors. It is possible that the memory of these gardens was later linked to Babylon, which was considered a symbol of Oriental splendor in the Greco-Roman world anyway. Whether in Babylon or Nineveh, the technical challenge would have been enormous in any case. Supplying plants at a height of several meters with water requires sophisticated irrigation systems. Ancient authors spoke of screws or pumps that lifted water from the Euphrates. It would have been a masterpiece of ancient engineering, comparable to today's hanging gardens or roof terraces of modern metropolises. The symbolic meaning of the gardens is at least as exciting as the question of their existence. They embodied the ideal of paradise, a place where nature and culture were combined in perfect harmony. In an arid region like Mesopotamia, the image of a green, lush garden was of deep importance. It stood for life, abundance, and divine favor. The fact that the gardens were counted among the wonders of the world shows how strongly people have always been fascinated by the idea of conquering nature and renewing it in an artificial form. Even though archaeological evidence is lacking, the Hanging Gardens still have an unbroken appeal today. Perhaps their fascination lies precisely in the fact that they float between reality and legend. They are a symbol of longing, for beauty, for nature, for a lost paradise. And in a way, they have fulfilled their task. They stimulate the imagination, make us dream, and search for a place where the impossible seems possible. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon stand for a paradox. They are among the largest buildings of antiquity, and yet no one knows for sure whether they were ever built. They are a miracle because they exist in people's minds, and perhaps that is exactly the greatest form of immortality. In the next chapter, we will take a closer look at the city with which this miracle is traditionally associated, Babylon itself. A metropolis full of myths, power, and monuments, which in ancient times was considered one of the largest cities in the world. Chapter 6. Babylon as a City, Splendor and Greatness on the Euphrates. When you hear the name Babylon, a mixture of fascination and mystery immediately resonates. Hardly any other ancient city is so strongly shrouded in myths. Hardly any other has such a long-lasting effect on religion, literature, and historiography. For some, Babylon was the symbol of wealth and splendor, for others, the symbol of sin and destruction. Located between the Euphrates and the steppe, the city was once a center of power, culture, and architecture. And it forms the cultural backdrop for one of the most famous wonders of the world, the Hanging Gardens. The beginnings of Babylon go back a long way, but the city experienced its great heyday in the 6th century BC under King Nebuchadnezzar II. He made Babylon one of the largest metropolises in the known world. Contemporary accounts speak of massive walls surrounding the city, of magnificent palaces, temples, and processional roads decorated with colored bricks. Babylon was not only a political capital, but also a religious center where the gods were worshipped, first and foremost Marduk, the main god of the Babylonian religion. The city was famous above all for its walls. Ancient authors described them as huge fortifications, so wide that entire wagon trains could run on them. While these accounts may be exaggerated, they do show the impression Babylon made on visitors. In a time when cities were often small and modest, Babylon stood out as a super metropolis, with a population that probably numbered several 100,000 people. The centerpiece of the city was the Ishtar Gate, a magnificent structure clad in blue glazed bricks. Reliefs of lions, bulls, and dragons adorned the walls and symbolized the cower of the gods. A processional road, which was also richly decorated, was used for religious festivals through the city. Parts of the Ishtar Gate in the Pergamon Museum in Berlin are still preserved today, a testimony to the former splendor that has survived for thousands of years. In addition to the palaces and gates, the ziggurat of Babylon was also famous, a stepped temple tower that may have served as a model for the biblical story of the Tower of Babel. It is said to have been over 90 meters high and dedicated to the god Marduk. From above, it probably offered a view over the entire city and the fertile land on the Euphrates. For the people of antiquity, such a tower was more than architecture. It was a symbol of the connection between heaven and earth. But Babylon was not only a city of monuments, but also a city of science and culture. It was here that significant advances in astronomy, mathematics, and law were made. The famous Codex Hammurabi, one of the oldest known legal texts, was promulgated in Babylon. The Babylonian astronomers observed the course of the stars and planets and laid foundations that still influenced the Greeks. The flip side of greatness was the reputation that Babylon received in later traditions. In the Bible, for example, Babylon became a symbol of pride and godlessness. Its destruction by the Persians in 539 BC was interpreted as divine punishment. Later, the Christian tradition also took up this image, and so Babylon became a symbol of corruption, luxury, and moral decay. This negative image often overshadowed the historical reality of an advanced civilization that was one of the most important of its time. Whether the Hanging Gardens actually stood in Babylon remains questionable. But even if not, the city offered enough splendor to appear in the eyes of Greek travelers as the home of a wonder of the world. The walls, the Ishtar Gate, the ziggurat, all of this could merge into the narratives and lead to the idea of a city that was superhumanly large and rich. Today, only ruins remain of Babylon, but its effect is unbroken. Archaeological excavations have brought to light much that confirms the narratives of antiquity, and at the same time, much remains in the dark. Babylon has thus become a symbol of the rise and fall of empires, of human creativity, and its transience. In the next chapter, we turn to another miracle that, unlike Babylon, is well documented: the Temple of Artemis in Ephesus, a sanctuary that embodied not only religious veneration, but also architectural greatness, and that established the fame of an entire city. Chapter 7: The Temple of Artemis in Ephesus, Goddess and Cult. Among the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the Temple of Artemis in Ephesus is considered one of the most magnificent. It was not only a building of enormous proportions, but also the religious heart of an entire region and a symbol of the worship of a goddess whose influence extended far beyond Ephesus. In it, religion, architecture, and identity combined to form a monument that left contemporaries speechless and whose fame continued into distant posterity. Ephesus, located on the coast of Asia Minor in what is now Western Turkey, was an important trading city. It was conveniently located by the sea and on important land routes, so it became a crossroads for goods, ideas, and cultures. The first large temple of Artemis was built here in the 6th century BC. But what distinguished it from other sanctuaries was its size. It surpassed everything that had been known until then and set new standards in architecture. The goddess Artemis was one of the great deities of the Greek world. As the goddess of hunting, fertility, and birth, she embodied opposites: wild nature and protective care. In Ephesus, their cult had a special character. Here, not only the Greek Artemis was worshipped, but also a figure who was also influenced by Anatolian mother goddesses. The famous statues of Ephesus depict the goddess with numerous breasts or eggs on her body, symbols of fertility and abundance. This cult made the temple one of the most important religious centers in the entire region. The first temple was started under King Croesus of Lydia, who was known for his legendary riches. Architects such as Chersiphron and Metagenes designed a monumental structure that was unparalleled in size and beauty. It was almost 120 meters long, over 50 meters wide, and supported by over 100 marble columns, each over 18 meters high. Even this first building was a miracle in itself, a temple that made visible the greatness of the goddess and the power of the city of Ephesus. But the history of the temple is also a story of destruction and reconstruction. In 356 BC, it was destroyed by arson, on the very night Alexander the Great was born, according to tradition. The arsonist, a man named Herostratus, wanted to make his name immortal at all costs. Ironically, he succeeded. While the magnificent building was lost, the name of the perpetrator was preserved in historiography. But Ephesus was not discouraged. Soon the reconstruction began, larger and more magnificent than ever before. This second temple, completed in the 4th century BC, was the real wonder of the world, attracting visitors from all over the world. It was once again adorned with huge columns, shown in marble and bronze, and its reliefs and statues depicted scenes from mythology and cult. Travelers such as Pausanias or Pliny the Elder described it as one of the largest buildings they had ever seen. However, the temple was not only a religious place, it was also a political and economic center. Merchants deposited their goods here, pilgrims brought offerings, and the city of Ephesus gained prestige and influence through the temple. The cult of Artemis united the population, and its festivals attracted visitors from all over the Aegean. The temple was thus a symbol of unity and identity, far more than just a stone building. The destruction finally came in several stages. First, the Goths plundered the temple in the 3rd century AD. Later, it fell into disrepair for good when Christianity became the dominant religion in the region. Today, only a few columns and foundations remain, but the idea of its former greatness lives on. The Temple of Artemis of Ephesus was therefore not only a wonder of the world because it was large and magnificent. It was a miracle because it set an entire culture in stone, the belief in a powerful goddess, the pride of a city, and man's ability to erect monuments that defy time and nature, at least for a while. In the next chapter, we will take a look at the city itself, Ephesus, the commercial and cultural metropolis of Asia Minor, whose wealth and history were closely linked to the temple. Chapter 8: Ephesus, a city between religion, trade, and politics. The Temple of Artemis was the heart, but the city of Ephesus was the body in which that heart beat. No other city in Asia Minor combined religion, trade, and culture in such a way as Ephesus. It was a metropolis, a port city, a place of pilgrimage, and a political center, and it embodied the splendor of the Hellenistic and later Roman world like no other. Located on the west coast of Asia Minor, in what is now Western Turkey, Ephesus was predestined for trade and exchange due to its location by the sea and on important country roads. Ships from Greece, Egypt, and Syria arrived here, and goods from the interior of Anatolia found their way through the city to the Mediterranean world. Spices, olive oil, wine, wood, precious stones, and metals changed hands. Ephesus was a vibrant transshipment point where merchants from all over the world came together. But it was not only trade that made the city great. Religion played an equally central role. The cult of Artemis of Ephesus was of national importance, and pilgrims flocked to the city to offer sacrifices in the great temple. Religious festivals, processions, and markets accompanied these pilgrimages and contributed to Ephesus becoming not only an economic but also a spiritual center. The city itself reflected this wealth. Even in the Hellenistic period, it had magnificent streets, squares, and buildings. Under Roman rule, Ephesus reached its peak. Amphitheaters, libraries, grammar schools, and baths still bear witness to its former greatness. Particularly famous is the Library of Celsus, a magnificent building from the 2nd century AD, which is still preserved today in impressive ruins. With its facade of marble columns and reliefs, it was not only a place of knowledge, but also a symbol of the city's cultural aspirations. Politically, Ephesus played an eventful role. Sometimes it was under Persian rule, sometimes under Greek influence, later under Roman control. Each era has left its mark, and the city has been able to adapt while maintaining its importance. Under the Romans, Ephesus was the capital of the province of Asia and the center of administration where officials, merchants, and scholars met. The theater of Ephesus was another symbol of the city. With space for around 25,000 spectators, it was one of the largest of its time. Not only theater performances and festivals took place here, but also political meetings. Even in the early days of Christianity, Ephesus played a role. The Apostle Paul preached here, but met with resistance from the population who saw their goddess Artemis threatened. This episode shows how much religion and identity were intertwined in Ephesus. But as big and powerful as the city was, it did not remain invulnerable. Nature and time took their toll on her. The sea receded, the port silted up, and Ephesus lost its most important lifeline. Without access to the sea, trade could not be maintained, and the city slowly fell into disrepair. The magnificent buildings remained, but people emigrated. Today, only ruins remain, but they still hint at the splendor of a city that was once one of the largest in the world. Ephesus was thus much more than just the location of the Temple of Artemis. It was a melting pot in which religion, politics, culture, and trade formed a single entity. The city shows how closely the wonders of the world were connected to their surroundings. The temple alone would not have been conceivable without the wealth and importance of Ephesus, and the city itself owed much of its fame to the sanctuary. In the next chapter, we turn to another wonder of the world that was not only an architectural masterpiece, but also a central work of art in the Greek religion, the statue of Zeus in Olympia, created by the famous sculptor Phidias. Chapter 9. The statue of Zeus in Olympia, work of art of Phidias. Among the 7 wonders of the world, the statue of Zeus in Olympia was perhaps the most impressive work of art in the strict sense. While pyramids, temples, or lighthouses were above all architectural masterpieces, this was a sculpture, but a sculpture so enormous and magnificent that it became the embodiment of divine majesty. Created by the famous sculptor Phidias, it embodied the greatness of the Greek faith, and at the same time, the highest perfection of classical art. Olympia, the place where the statue was located, was not only a religious site, but also a symbol of Greek identity. It hosted the Olympic Games, which gathered athletes and spectators from all over the Greek world every 4 years. They were not only sporting competitions, but also religious festivals in honor of Zeus, the father of the gods. In the middle of this sacred complex rose the Temple of Zeus, and, inside it, enthroned the statue that became the wonder of the world. Phidias, who had already created the famous Athena in the Parthenon of Athens, was commissioned to design the image of Zeus in the 5th century BC. He chose a technique called chryselephantine, a combination of gold and ivory. Ivory was used for the skin areas, gold for robes and jewelry. The result was a figure that seemed alive and unearthly at the same time. The statue was enormous. It is said to have been around 12 meters high, so that it filled almost the entire interior of the temple. Zeus was depicted seated, but even in this posture, he towered so tall that his head almost touched the roof. Ancient reports say that it gave the impression that if he had stood up, he would have blown up the temple. In his right hand, Zeus held a small goddess of victory, Nike, and in his left a scepter crowned by an eagle. His throne was ornately decorated with reliefs, figures, and precious stones. Gold and ivory shone everywhere, so that the statue shone in the light of the torches. For the visitors who entered the temple, it must have been an overwhelming sight, a god who was not only depicted but almost present. The effect on contemporaries was correspondingly low. Pausanias, a travel writer of the 2nd century AD, reverently reported on the statue. The Roman orator Dio Chrysostom even wrote that anyone who saw them would have immediately regained faith in the gods, even if he had previously harbored doubts. Such statements show how much art and religion intertwined here. But the statue was not only a religious symbol, but also a political one. She embodied the unity of the Greeks at a time when they were often at odds. Olympia was a sacred place, where there was a truce and wars paused when the games took place. The statue of Zeus was the visible sign of this commonality, a god who watched over all the cities and peoples of the Hellenes. We know little about its end. The statue was probably destroyed in the 4th or 5th century AD, when Christianity became the state religion, and the pagan sanctuaries fell into disrepair. Some reports indicate that it was taken to Constantinople and destroyed in a fire there. The only thing that is certain is that it no longer exists today. Only the descriptions of antiquity tell of its splendor. Despite its disappearance, the statue of Zeus still resonates today. It shows how far the Greeks went in the art of sculpture, not only in technical perfection, but also in the ability to embody faith and emotion. In it, the divine was combined with the human, the splendor of the materials with the sublimity of the idea. The statue was a miracle because it was more than an image. It was a presence, an experience that overwhelmed visitors and made them feel like they were in close proximity to the Father of the gods himself. In the next chapter, we want to look not only at the work of art, but also at Olympia as a place, at the games, the rituals, and the importance of this sanctuary for the Greek world. Chapter 10. Olympia: Games, Religion, and the Heritage of the Greeks. When you hear the name Olympia, you immediately think of the Olympic Games of the modern era. But its origins lie deep in antiquity, and there, the Olympics were much more than a sporting event. It was a sacred place, a center of religious worship, where the Greeks not only crowned their best athletes, but also celebrated their cultural identity. The statue of Zeus was the centerpiece of the sanctuary, but what made Olympia special was the unique combination of religion, sport, and community. According to tradition, the Games of Olympia are said to have begun in 776 BC, a date that the Greeks later used as a point of reference for their calendar. Every 4 years, people from all parts of the Greek world flocked together, from Athens to Sparta to the colonies in Sicily or Asia Minor. For the duration of the Games, the Olympic truce was in force, a holy truce that allowed athletes and spectators to travel unhindered. The focus was on the worship of Zeus. Olympia was not a neutral sports ground, but a sanctuary. Offerings, processions, and rituals accompanied the competitions. The statue of Zeus, created by Phidias, embodied the divine dimension of this place. The highest of the gods watched over the games, and the victory of an athlete was understood as a sign of divine favor. The competitions themselves were varied. In addition to the famous running disciplines, there were wrestling, boxing, pankration, a kind of mixture of wrestling and fighting without rules, as well as pentathlon, which combined running, discus, javelin throw, long jump, and wrestling. Horse races and chariot races were particularly spectacular and took place in the hippodrome. Winners did not receive a cash prize, but a simple wreath made of olive branches. But the fame associated with this victory was priceless. It brought honor and prestige to the athlete's hometown, and the winner himself was often celebrated like a hero. The Olympics were therefore also a political place. Although the competition was supposed to stand above all conflicts, the Games offered an opportunity for propaganda. City-states erected statues to celebrate their victories. Rulers donated buildings or treasures to put themselves in the limelight. Olympia was a stage on which power, wealth, and influence were shown, but always in the context of a religious festival that highlighted the community of all Greeks. The layout of Olympia reflected this importance. In addition to the Temple of Zeus, there were numerous other buildings, treasure houses in which cities kept their votive offerings, training halls for the athletes, a stadium for the competitions, and accommodation for visitors. It was a place that became the center of the Greek world for a few weeks every 4 years. Over time, the games gained a tradition that lasted for centuries. They survived wars, political upheavals, and the rise and fall of powers. It was not until the 4th century AD that they were finally discontinued, when Christianity became the dominant religion and pagan cults were banned. Nevertheless, the legacy of the Olympics is enormous. The idea that people from different regions come together in peaceful competition is still an ideal that the modern Olympic Games revive today. The idea that sport is more than just physical performance, but an expression of culture, identity, and togetherness is deeply rooted in antiquity. The Olympics showed that the wonders of the world were not isolated, but embedded in a larger cultural environment. The statue of Zeus was not only a masterpiece of art, but also part of a tradition that combined religion and everyday life, sport and faith. It made visible that man strives for greatness, not only in stone but also in body and mind. In the next chapter, we turn to another wonder of the world that was very different in its form, the Mausoleum of Halicarnassus, a tomb that was so magnificent that it promised fame and immortality even beyond death. Chapter 11. The Mausoleum of Halicarnassus, Tomb as a Wonder of the World. The Mausoleum of Halicarnassus occupies a special position among the 7 wonders of the world. While the pyramids of Giza were built as royal tombs in gigantic form, the mausoleum was a tomb of a completely different kind. It combined architecture and sculpture into a work of art that was so extraordinary that the name of its patron, Mausolus, is still synonymous with magnificent tombs today. Anyone who speaks of a mausoleum today unconsciously refers to this miracle of antiquity. The story begins in the 4th century BC in Halicarnassus, a city on the coast of Asia Minor, in the area of today's Bodrum in Turkey. Mausolus, the satrap, governor of the Persian Empire in Caria, ruled over a flourishing region there. Although he was a Persian official, he adopted many elements of Greek culture. Halicarnassus developed into a metropolis that combined Greek architecture with Oriental splendor. When Mausolus died in 353 BC, his wife and sister, Artemisia II, had a tomb built that was to be unique in its size and beauty. It was not only a place of burial, but a monument to power, wealth, and cultural sophistication. Artemisia wanted the memory of Mausolus not to fade, and so she commissioned the best architects and sculptors of her time to build it. The result was a structure that was almost 45 meters high and was a mixture of Greek temple, Oriental funerary architecture, and artistic masterpiece in its form. The foundation was square, above which rose columned halls, and finally a pyramid-shaped roof. At the top stood a huge quadriga, a 4-horse chariot with statues of Mausolus and Artemisia rising into the sky. The walls of the mausoleum were richly decorated with reliefs depicting scenes from mythology. Battles between Greeks and Amazons, between gods and giants, heroic battles. Famous artists such as Scopas, Bryaxis, Timotheos, and Leocharis worked on this building, names that are considered masters of their craft in Greek art history. Thus, the mausoleum was not only a tomb, but also a gallery of ancient art. Visitors reported on the beauty of the building, which seemed like a total work of art. Architecture, sculpture, and symbolism merged with each other. It was a place that honored the dead, but was also intended to impress the living. Anyone who entered Halicarnassus saw in the mausoleum a sign of greatness and permanence. However, the fate of the mausoleum was similar to that of many wonders of the world. It survived wars and earthquakes for centuries, but was severely damaged in the Middle Ages. Finally, in the 15th century, the Knights of St. John used many of its stones to build the fortress of Bodrum. Large parts of the tomb disappeared, and only fragments, reliefs, and foundations remained. Some of the ornate reliefs later ended up in the British Museum, where they can still be seen today. Despite its demise, the Mausoleum of Halicarnassus has retained its importance. It shows how much people have always tried to secure fame and memory beyond death with monumental buildings. While the pyramids elevated kings to eternity, the mausoleum was an attempt to achieve immortality through art and beauty. The mausoleum is thus not only a wonder of the world, but also a symbol of the human longing for permanence. It makes it clear that even in antiquity, death was not only seen as an end, but as an opportunity to erect a monument that would stand the test of time. In the next chapter, we take a look at the environment of this building, at the Carians, the people of Halicarnassus, and at the special culture of this region, which made the mausoleum possible in the first place. Chapter 12. The Carians and their culture. Halicarnassus in context. To understand the mausoleum of Halicarnassus, one must also know the people and culture that gave birth to it, the Carians. This people lived in the region of Caria in southwestern Asia Minor, a region that was under Persian, Greek, and Roman influence over the centuries. The Carians were not an isolated culture, but part of a complex coexistence in which traditions, languages, and religions flowed into each other. It was precisely this mixture of independence and openness that made it possible to create a building like the mausoleum. The Carians were originally a people who were strongly connected to the sea. Even in the early days, they were associated with piracy and mercenary services. They were considered excellent seafarers and warriors, who were often in the service of other powers. Greek authors often portray them as pugnacious people, whose loyalty could be secured through pay. This reputation as mercenaries and seafarers made them an important factor in the power struggles of the Aegean. However, their homeland was not only militarily influenced, but also culturally diverse. Caria was a borderland between the Greek world and the empires of the East, especially the Persian Empire. This location led to Carian cities such as Halicarnassus adopting Greek language, architecture, and religion without completely relinquishing their independence. Greek was spoken, Greek gods were honored, but local traditions and cults were also preserved. The city of Halicarnassus was the center of this culture. It experienced its heyday under Mausolus. He moved the seat of government there, had city walls built, ports expanded, and public buildings built. Halicarnassus thus became one of the most important cities on the coast of Asia Minor, combining trade, politics, and culture. The influence of the Persians continued to be felt, but the city increasingly presented itself in the Greek style, a hybrid character that found its most visible expression in the architecture of the mausoleum. The religion of the Carians also reflected this mixture. They worshipped both Greek and Anatolian deities. The connection to mother goddesses and local fertility cults is particularly well known. At the same time, Olympian gods such as Zeus and Artemis found their way into their sanctuaries. This religious openness made it possible to create works of art that impressed both Greeks and Persians. The mausoleum itself was an expression of this cultural symbiosis. Its shape combined elements of a Greek temple, the columns and reliefs, with a pyramid-like roof structure that reveals Oriental influences. The quadriga on the top, in which Mausolus and Artemisia were represented, combined the idea of divine apotheosis with an image of secular power. This interplay of different traditions was typical of Caria and shows how creative and innovative border cultures could be. The everyday life of the Carians was also shaped by this situation between worlds. They farmed, grew wine and olives, traded with the Greek islands and with the interior. Their cities were closely connected to the Aegean Sea by ports, but at the same time, they were also connected by roads to the major Persian centers. This networking brought prosperity and made it possible to promote art and architecture at the highest level. The memory of the Carians faded over time, but the mausoleum of Halicarnassus keeps their name alive. It is a symbol of the fact that even smaller peoples could create masterpieces in the shadow of large empires that went down in history. While Greeks and Persians were often at the center of historiography, Caria shows that regional cultures also made their contribution to world history, and sometimes left behind works that outlasted even the greatest empires. This makes it clear that the mausoleum was not only a tomb for a ruler, but a monument to an entire culture. It summed up the identity of the Carians, combative, cosmopolitan, shaped by influences from different traditions, and at the same time proud of their own uniqueness. In the next chapter, we turn to a miracle that was perhaps the most impressive symbol of victory and freedom in ancient times, the Colossus of Rhodes, a gigantic statue that became one of the most famous landmarks of the ancient world. Chapter 13, the Colossus of Rhodes, symbol of freedom and power. When you think of the wonders of antiquity, the image of the Colossus of Rhodes is one of the most impressive. A gigantic statue, towering high above the port city of Rhodes, and supposedly letting ships sail between its legs. This is how this miracle was imagined for centuries. Even if this idea comes from later times and probably does not correspond to reality, the Colossus remains a symbol of greatness, pride, and freedom. The story begins in the 4th century BC, when the island of Rhodes rose to become one of the most important powers in the Eastern Mediterranean. Strategically located between Greece, Asia Minor, and Egypt, Rhodes was a center of trade and seafaring. The city of Rhodes, founded in 408 BC, united the inhabitants of the island in a new metropolis that quickly developed into a trading power. In 305 BC, the city was besieged by Demetrios Poliorketes, the son of Alexander the Great. He tried to take the city with huge siege engines, but the Rhodians put up fierce resistance. After more than a year, Demetrius had to give up the siege, a triumph that made Rhodes a symbol of strength and freedom. To celebrate this victory, the Rhodians decided to erect a monument that would show their independence and pride. They turned to the sculptor Chares of Lindos, a pupil of the famous Lysippos. Chares was commissioned to create a statue of the sun god Helios, who was worshipped as the patron god of the island. The result was the Colossus of Rhodes, a bronze statue that is said to have been around 32 meters high, almost as high as the Statue of Liberty in New York, if you disregard its pedestal. This made the Colossus one of the largest statues of antiquity. It probably did not stand above the harbor entrance, as is often depicted, but on a square or hill in the city, where it was visible from afar. The construction took about 12 years and began around 292 BC. It was financed by the sale of Demetrios's abandoned siege engines, which were melted down and turned into money. Thus, the Colossus was literally created from the remains of the failed attack, a triumph cast in bronze. The statue depicted Helios wearing a crown of rays, possibly with a raised hand holding a torch or scepter. There is no reliable information about its exact appearance, as no depictions from the time have survived. Later descriptions of it towering over the harbor are romantic embellishments. But even without these exaggerations, the Colossus was an impressive work of technology and art. However, its lifespan was tragically short. After about 50 years, around 226 BC, Rhodes was shaken by a severe earthquake in which the Colossus collapsed. Ancient accounts tell that the statue lay on the ground in huge fragments, which were nevertheless so impressive that visitors continued to marvel at it. The destroyed Colossus remained lying there for more than 800 years, until the remains were melted down and sold in the 7th century AD. Despite its early demise, the Colossus remained alive in people's memories. For the Rhodians, it was the symbol of their struggle for freedom. For the Greeks, a masterpiece of art. For later generations, a symbol of the greatness of antiquity. Even today, it inspires ideas of monumentality. It is not for nothing that the Statue of Liberty is often referred to as a modern Colossus. The Colossus of Rhodes shows that the wonders of the world were not only technical masterpieces, but also political symbols. It was a monument to victory, a message to the world that a small island was capable of resisting an overpowering army. Its bronze reflected the strength of a people who proudly defended their freedom. In the next chapter, we will take a look at the city itself, Rhodes, the trading and maritime power that has become one of the most important centers of the Mediterranean due to its location and courage. Chapter 14. Rhodes, Trading Power and Seafaring City. The island of Rhodes, located on the threshold between the Aegean Sea and the Eastern Mediterranean, was much more than just the location of a wonder of the world in ancient times. It was a hub of trade, a maritime power of international standing, and a cultural center that combined art, science, and politics. Without the economic and political rise of the city of Rhodes, the Colossus would never have come into being. It was the visible symbol of a metropolis that experienced its heyday in the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC. The founding of the city of Rhodes in 408 BC was itself an expression of unity and strength. Previously, several smaller cities had dominated the island, but they decided to join forces in a new capital. This city, located on the northern tip of the island, was planned according to the most modern principles of its time. Streets ran in a regular grid, squares and public buildings were purposefully arranged, and the port was designed to allow trade and shipping to function optimally. This planned structure alone was a sign of self-confidence. Rhodes benefited enormously from its geographical location. It was located at an interface between Greece, Asia Minor, Egypt, and the Middle East. Ships transporting goods, wine, olive oil, grain, metals, luxury goods from the East stopped here. The Rhodians knew how to exploit this advantage. They expanded their fleet, established trade relations, and created a network of treaties that gave them influence far beyond their size. Rhodian seafaring played a special role. The Rhodians were considered outstanding shipbuilders and sailors. Their warships, the triremes and later larger types, were feared and respected. At the same time, they set standards in commercial law. The so-called maritime law of Rhodes continued to influence Roman and medieval maritime law centuries later. It regulated questions of freight, compensation, and responsibility, foundations that continue to have an impact into modern times. But Rhodes was not only an economic center, but also a cultural one. The city attracted philosophers, artists, and scientists. The Rhodian school of rhetoric was particularly well known, where young men from all over the Greek world trained their oratory skills. Sculpture also flourished. Works such as the famous Laocoon group, which now stands in the Vatican, probably come from Rhodes and show the dramatic expressiveness of Hellenistic art. Politically, Rhodes saw itself as an independent republic that skillfully maneuvered between the great powers. Sometimes it was in alliance with the Ptolemies in Egypt, sometimes with the Seleucids or Romans. Their strength lay in remaining flexible and using their fleet as leverage. The victory over Demetrius Poliarchetus, described in chapter 13, was a decisive moment. It made Rhodes a symbol of resilience and gave the city international prestige. Everyday life in Rhodes reflected this wealth. The city was characterized by markets in which goods from all over the world were traded. Traders from Egypt, Syria, Greece, and even more distant regions met here. At the same time, Rhodes was also a city of festivals and religious life. The sun god Helios, patron god of the island, was honored with processions, sacrifices, and festivals. The Colossus dedicated to him was the most visible sign of this veneration. But Rhodes did not remain unchallenged forever. From the 2nd century BC, the island increasingly came under the influence of Rome. Initially valued as an ally, Rhodes later lost importance when Rome itself took control of the Eastern Mediterranean trade. Nevertheless, the city remained an important center for a long time, retaining its cultural and economic charisma. Today, ruins, port facilities, and archaeological finds remind us of the former greatness of Rhodes. The idea of the Colossus may still shape the image of the city today, but its true strength lay in its role as a trading power, seafaring city, and cultural center that had influence far beyond their island. In the next chapter, we turn to a miracle that impressed in a completely different way, not through symbolism or art alone, but through its technical masterpiece, the Alexandria Lighthouse, which became one of the most important structures of seafaring for centuries. Chapter 15. The Alexandria Lighthouse, Technology and Seafaring. Among the 7 wonders of the world, the Lighthouse of Alexandria was probably the most useful. While pyramids, temples, and statues primarily served religious or symbolic purposes, the lighthouse served a practical purpose: to show sailors the way, to give them security, and to make the power of one of the most important cities of antiquity visible. It was a technical masterpiece that served as a model for all later lighthouses for many centuries. The lighthouse was built in the 3rd century BC on the island of Pharos off the coast of Alexandria. Alexandria itself had been founded by Alexander the Great a few decades earlier and had quickly developed into a metropolis. Under the Ptolemies, the Greek rulers of Egypt, the city became a center of trade, culture, and science. In order for ships to reach the port safely, a beacon was needed. And it was decided not to erect just any signal, but a structure that would do justice to the importance of the city. The architect Sostratos of Knidos was commissioned, and what he created was a technical and architectural sensation. The lighthouse is said to have been about 120 to 140 meters high, making it the second tallest structure of antiquity after the Great Pyramid of Giza. Its structure was divided into 3 parts. A square foundation formed the base, above which rose an octagonal central part, and the end was formed by a cylindrical tower with a fire burning at the top. Mirrors made of polished metal amplified the light so that it radiated far beyond the sea. For the sailors, the lighthouse was invaluable. The Mediterranean was a hub of trade, and Alexandria was one of its most important ports. Ships from Greece, Asia Minor, Syria, and Italy arrived here, as did ships from Egypt that delivered grain for the growing cities of the Mediterranean. The lighthouse not only showed them the way, it also warned of dangerous shallows and made the port of Alexandria one of the safest. But the lighthouse was more than a navigational instrument. He was also a symbol of power. Visible from afar, it proclaimed the greatness of Alexandria, which had become one of the leading cities of the ancient world under the Ptolemies. He combined utility with representation, a building that showed that technology and culture could go hand in hand. His effect on his contemporaries was enormous. Ancient authors described it as a marvel that impressed with its height and function in equal measure. For many visitors, it was the first thing they saw of Alexandria, and at the same time, the last when they left the city. The lighthouse thus became the gateway to the city, an architectural welcome that promised security and size at the same time. The lighthouse survived for many centuries, but like so many wonders of the world, it eventually fell victim to the forces of nature. Several earthquakes between the 10th and 14th centuries destroyed large parts of the building. Its stones were later used to build a fortress that still stands in Alexandria today. Nevertheless, the memory of him remained alive, and his name, Pharos, became synonymous with lighthouse in many languages, from French phare to Italian faro. Its significance extends far beyond antiquity. The Alexandria Lighthouse shows that wonders of the world had to be not only magnificent monuments, but also buildings that concretely improved people's lives. It was an example of applied technology in monumental form, and it shows how closely trade, seafaring, and culture were linked in antiquity. In the next chapter, we want to focus not only on the lighthouse, but on the city that surrounded it, a metropolis of science, culture, and power, which was a center of the ancient world for many centuries. Chapter 16. Alexandria, City of Science and Culture. When you think of the great cities of antiquity, names like Athens, Rome, or Babylon come to mind. But Alexandria was in no way inferior to them. On the contrary, under the Ptolemies, the city developed into one of the most important centers of the ancient world, a melting pot of peoples, ideas, and science. The lighthouse on the island of Pharos was its landmark, visible from afar. But the heart of Alexandria beat in its streets, its libraries, its markets, and in the minds of those who lived and researched there. Alexandria was founded in 331 BC by Alexander the Great. The Macedonian conqueror had a plan to create an empire that would connect Greece and the East. On the coast of Egypt, on the western edge of the Nile Delta, he had a new city built that was to bear his name. The location was ideal, in the immediate vicinity of the fertile Nile, but at the same time with direct access to the Mediterranean Sea. Shortly after its founding, Alexandria developed into a hub of trade between Africa, Asia, and Europe. After Alexander's death, the city fell to the Ptolemies, his Macedonian successors in Egypt. They made Alexandria their capital and endowed it with a splendor that was second to none. Wide streets, royal palaces, temples, theaters, and harbors characterized the picture. The lighthouse on Pharos was the monumental entrance gate that greeted travelers. But inside the city, another wonder awaited: the Library of Alexandria. This library was not an official wonder of the world, but in the eyes of many, it would have deserved a place on the list. It was an attempt to collect all the knowledge of the world at that time. Ships calling at the port of Alexandria had to hand in their books and scrolls, which were then copied and kept in the library. Estimates put the number of hundreds of thousands of scrolls, a collection that combined the knowledge of Greeks, Egyptians, Babylonians, Indians, and many other cultures. Connected to the library was the Museum, a kind of research institute where scholars lived, worked, and exchanged their findings. Great thinkers such as the mathematician Euclid, who laid the foundations of geometry, or the astronomer Aristarchus of Samos, who placed the sun at the center of the universe as early as the 3rd century BC, long before Copernicus took up this idea again. The engineer Heron of Alexandria, known for his mechanical inventions, and the geographer Eratosthenes, who calculated the circumference of the Earth with astonishing accuracy, also worked here. Alexandria was thus not only a trading and port city, but also a center of knowledge. It attracted scholars from all over the ancient world who researched, wrote, and taught here. The Ptolemies encouraged this quest for knowledge, not least because it increased their fame. The city thus became a symbol of the fact that power lay not only in armies and ships, but also in the spirit. At the same time, Alexandria was a multicultural metropolis. Greeks, Egyptians, Jews, Syrians, and people of many other peoples lived here side by side. On the one hand, this diversity was a richness, but it also brought tensions with it. Again and again there were conflicts between the population groups, which sometimes even led to bloody uprisings. Nevertheless, it was precisely this mixture that made Alexandria a city in which ideas met, mixed, and produced something new. Everyday life in Alexandria was characterized by this coexistence of trade, religion, and science. Goods from all over the world were piled up in the ports: grain from Egypt, papyrus scrolls, spices from India, gold from Nubia, olive oil from Greece. Merchants and sailors populated the markets, while philosophers debated in the streets, priests held processions, and students studied in schools. But Alexandria was not spared from the strokes of fate of history either. The library was plundered or destroyed several times, whether by Julius Caesar's troops in 48 BC, by internal battles, or by later conquests. The decline of the library is still a symbol of the loss of knowledge and the transience of human works. Nevertheless, the myth of Alexandria lives on. To this day, the city stands for the idea that trade, culture, and science can be in a fruitful exchange. The lighthouse on Pharos was her technical wonder of the world, the library her spiritual one. Together, they made Alexandria a city that was unique in ancient times and whose reputation still resonates thousands of years later. In the next chapter, let's take a step back and reflect on the wonders of the world as a whole. What role did they play in antiquity? Were they just monuments of stone and bronze, or an expression of deeper ideas of power, religion, and human greatness?
Chapter 17. The Role of the Wonders of the World in Antiquity, Prestige, Power, and Religion. At first glance, the 7 wonders of the ancient world are very different structures: pyramids, temples, gardens, statues, a lighthouse. But as different as their forms are, they have something in common. They were an expression of human ambition and served to make prestige, power, and religious convictions visible. Every wonder of the world was more than just a building in its time. It was a symbol that conveyed a message, and this message was just as important to contemporaries as the building itself. A decisive motive was the desire for prestige. Rulers, cities, and peoples wanted to show that they were capable of creating something unique. The Great Pyramid of Giza embodied the divine power of the pharaoh and his ability to mobilize resources and people. The Temple of Artemis showed the pride of Ephesus and its importance as a religious center. The Colossus of Rhodes was a sign of triumph after a victory against a superior force, and the Lighthouse of Alexandria was the shining landmark of an up-and-coming metropolis. In all cases, the wonder of the world was not only a building, but also a political statement. At the same time, religion and faith played a central role. Almost all wonders of the world were closely related to cult and veneration. The pyramids were burial sites that were supposed to ensure the transition to the afterlife. The Temple of Artemis was a sanctuary for a goddess who was worshipped far beyond Ephesus. The statue of Zeus in Olympia was not just a sculpture, but an image of the father of the gods himself, which left visitors in awe. Even the Colossus of Rhodes and the Lighthouse of Alexandria had religious dimensions. Helios, the sun god, was worshipped as the patron god of the island, and the light of the lighthouse was often interpreted as a divine ray. But the wonders of the world were not only an expression of religion and power, they were also signs of human creativity and technology. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon, whether real or mythical, stood for the dream of taming nature and creating beauty. The Alexandria Lighthouse was a masterpiece of engineering that combined practicality with monumental grandeur. The Mausoleum of Halicarnassus combined architecture and sculpture to create a total work of art that was to have an effect far beyond death. The role of the wonders of the world in antiquity was therefore also a cultural one. They created places that attracted visitors from all over the world. They were destinations for travel, material for stories and themes of literature and art. Those who had seen the wonders of the world could boast of having witnessed the greatest works of mankind. They were, in a sense, the must-sees of the ancient world, monuments that you had to see with your own eyes to be part of an educated elite. But at the same time, the wonders of the world had a social function. They created identity and community. For the Rhodians, the Colossus was a symbol of their freedom. For the Greeks as a whole, the statue of Zeus in Olympia was a common sanctuary that united them despite political rivalries. For the inhabitants of Ephesus, the temple of Artemis was the heart of their city, which filled them with pride. The wonders of the world were therefore also places of belonging, where people saw their convictions and traditions confirmed. However, one should not overlook the dark sides either. Many wonders of the world were possible because immense resources flowed into them, resources that were generated at the expense of ordinary people. Farmers, workers, and craftsmen did the hard work, while the monuments increased the fame of the powerful. They are therefore symbols not only of greatness, but also of social inequalities that already existed in antiquity. In the end, the wonders of the world were more than just buildings. They were reflections of their time, condensations of power, faith, art, and technology. Their message was clear. Man is capable of creating works that go beyond the everyday and lay claim to eternity. The fact that many of these miracles didn't survive only reinforces their symbolic power. They show the tension between the desire for permanence and the reality of transience. In the next chapter, we will turn to precisely this transience. We will see how wars, natural disasters, and time itself led to the disappearance of almost all the wonders of the world, and what their demise says about the human longing for immortality. Chapter 18: The Destruction of the Wonders of the World, Wars, Nature, and Transience. As impressive as the 7 wonders of the ancient world were, they are united by a common fate: their transience. With the exception of the Great Pyramid of Giza, all other wonders have perished, destroyed by wars, earthquakes, fires, or the creeping ravages of time. Their demise makes it clear that even the greatest works of mankind cannot last forever. But it was precisely this loss that reinforced their myth and gave them an aura that continues to this day. Let's start with the Temple of Artemis in Ephesus. He fell victim to the flames as early as 356 BC, on the night when, as legend goes, Alexander the Great was born. The arsonist Herostratos deliberately set fire to the building with the sole aim of becoming immortal. Although the temple was later rebuilt more magnificently than ever, a new fate befell it in the 3rd century AD. The Goths plundered and destroyed it, and finally the spread of Christianity caused the cult of Artemis to disappear. Today, only a few columns remain of its former size. The statue of Zeus in Olympia did not survive the times either. It was probably destroyed in the 4th or 5th century AD, when Christianity banned pagan sanctuaries. Some sources report that it was taken to Constantinople and destroyed in a fire. Others suspect that it already sank in Olympia itself. The only thing that is certain is that nothing remains of this miracle except the descriptions of the ancient authors. The Mausoleum of Halicarnassus stood for many centuries and even survived wars. But earthquakes between the 12th and 15th centuries finally caused it to collapse. Its stones were used by the Knights of St. John to build the fortress of Bodrum, which still stands today. A wonder of the world perished, and at the same time, it lives on within the walls of a medieval castle. The Colossus of Rhodes had the shortest life of all the wonders of the world. Only about 50 years after its completion, it was destroyed by a severe earthquake in 226 BC. The huge statue broke and lay in pieces on the ground. But even the fragments were so impressive that visitors still reported their size centuries later. It was not until the 7th century AD that the remains were finally melted down and sold. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon, whose existence is uncertain anyway, have also long since disappeared, if they ever existed. Neither archaeological traces nor contemporary Babylonian texts clearly mention them. Perhaps they were destroyed by the forces of nature, or perhaps simply by time and decay. Their demise is as mysterious as their possible existence. The Lighthouse of Alexandria lasted the longest after the Pyramid of Giza. For many centuries it showed sailors the way, but several earthquakes between the 10th and 14th centuries destroyed it piece by piece. In the 15th century, its remains were used to build the Qaitbay fortress, which still stands in Alexandria today. As with the Mausoleum, the wonder of the world lives on in a different form, as a quarry for new claims to power. The destruction of the wonders of the world was not a sudden act, but a process. Some fell victim to spectacular catastrophes, others to slow decay. But what they all have in common is that they were not immortal. They show that even the greatest achievements of humanity are subject to nature and history. And yet, it is precisely their downfall that has made them legends. If all these buildings were preserved to this day, they might only be a part of the archaeological sites that we could visit. But their absence has created room for imagination. Artists, writers, and historians have reinvented, embellished, and glorified their form over the centuries. Paradoxically, destruction was also part of their immortality. The wonders of the world thus teach us a double truth. They show what people are capable of, erecting monuments that stand the test of time. And they show that these works are also ephemeral, that nothing escapes the course of history. But in memory, in myths, and in stories, they survive longer than stone and bronze. In the next chapter, we will devote ourselves to this memory. How were the wonders of the world rediscovered, described, and reinterpreted in later times? From the Renaissance to the modern era, its reverberations remained alive, inspiring generations to reflect on the greatness of the past.
Chapter 19. The Rediscovery of the Wonders of the World, Renaissance to Modernity. When the 7 wonders of the ancient world perished over the centuries, they did not disappear from people's memory. On the contrary, their fame grew the less of them could be seen. In the darkness of the Middle Ages, they became legends. In the Renaissance, they became ideals. In the modern age, they became places of longing. The rediscovery of the wonders of the world shows how strongly the past has an impact on the present, and how much humanity has always searched for role models against whom it can measure itself. In the Middle Ages, most miracles had long since been destroyed or forgotten. Only the pyramids of Giza rose further out of the desert, impressive and enigmatic. Travelers who reached Egypt reported them, but their origin remained unclear. Some thought they were granaries of the biblical Joseph, others the buildings of mythical kings. It was not until much later that they were again understood as the tombs of the pharaohs. The other miracles lived on above all in texts, in the writings of ancient authors that were copied and passed on by monasteries. With the Renaissance, interest in antiquity was reawakened. Scholars in Italy, France, and Germany rediscovered the ancient texts, translated them, and made them accessible to a wider audience. Humanists such as Poggio Breccioni or later archaeologists such as Ciriaco of Ancona collected reports of the ancient wonders and began to reconstruct them in drawings and descriptions. This often resulted in idealized images that reveal more about the fantasy of the Renaissance than about the reality of antiquity. But it was precisely this fantasy that kept the fascination alive. The wonders of the world became models for architecture and art. The idea of creating monuments that could compete with the works of antiquity inspired builders of cathedrals, palaces, and monuments. Artists imagined what the Hanging Gardens might have looked like, how the Colossus towered over the harbor, or how the Lighthouse of Alexandria shone in the sun. This gave rise to a visual tradition that still shapes our image of the wonders of the world today, even if it is not always historically correct. In the Enlightenment and the Age of Discovery, the view was expanded once again. European travelers, researchers, and archaeologists went to the places where the wonders had stood. Napoleon took scholars with him to Egypt who systematically examined the pyramids. British and German archaeologists excavated in Ephesus, Halicarnassus, and Olympia. Piece by piece, foundations, reliefs, and fragments were brought to light, confirming or correcting the ancient reports. In the 19th and 20th centuries, the wonders of the world became a global symbol. With the rise of the nation-states, they were used to relate their own identity and greatness to antiquity. Museums in London, Paris, and Berlin exhibited fragments that amazed visitors. At the same time, the wonders of the world became a popular topic. Books, pictures, and later films told their stories again and again. Particularly formative was the idea that one had to compare the ancient wonders with modern monuments. The Statue of Liberty in New York was described as a new Colossus, the Eiffel Tower as a structure that dwarfs the pyramids. The longing to create one's own wonders of the world was an expression of the human desire to join the tradition of antiquity. Finally, in modern times, the list of wonders of the world itself has been questioned and expanded. In 2007, a private organization organized the election of the new 7 wonders of the world. Millions of people voted, and buildings such as the Great Wall of China, the Colosseum in Rome, or the rock city of Petra were given the title. This choice showed that the fascination for the idea of the wonders of the world is unbroken, even if the original list from antiquity is long gone. The rediscovery of the wonders of the world from the Renaissance to the modern age is thus not only a history of archaeological research, but also a history of human longing. It shows that we don't just see ruins in the buildings of the past, but reflections of our own dreams. We look to them for validation, inspiration, and sometimes comfort. The idea that people thousands of years ago created works that are still admired today has united us across the centuries. In the next and last chapter, we want to look at the legacy of these buildings. What remains of these buildings, not only in stones and writings, but in our memory, our culture, and our collective consciousness?
Chapter 20. Legacy and Myth. The Wonders of the World in Memory and Legend. At the end of this journey through the 7 wonders of the ancient world, one central question remains. What is their legacy? Almost all of them have disappeared, destroyed by wars, earthquakes, or the creeping decay of time. And yet they have a stronger impact than many other buildings that have survived to this day. Their fame is not tied to stones, but to stories, images, and myths that have been passed down through thousands of years. The legacy of the wonders of the world lies first and foremost in their function as symbols. They stand for the human ambition to make the seemingly impossible possible. The Great Pyramid of Giza embodies the dream of eternity. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon, the desire for beauty and nature in the middle of the desert. The Temple of Artemis and the statue of Zeus in Olympia are a reminder of how much religion and art were connected. The Mausoleum of Halicarnassus shows the attempt to achieve immortality through architecture and sculpture. The Colossus of Rhodes was a monument to victory, and the Alexandria Lighthouse combined utility with monumental splendor. Together, they show the whole spectrum of human longing, for power, for faith, for permanence, for beauty. But their legacy goes beyond their original function. They became legends that were told anew in every era. In the Middle Ages, they were reminders of the transience of worldly power. In the Renaissance, they were models for architecture and art. In the modern age, they were symbols of cultural greatness and inspiration for new wonders of the world. Their stories changed, but the fascination remained the same. Another legacy is language. The word mausoleum is still reminiscent of the tomb of Mausolus. Pharos became the general term for lighthouses. Even the idea of compiling lists of wonders of the world, whether the new 7 wonders of the world, the wonders of nature, or the wonders of technology, goes directly back to the ancient idea of summarizing the greatest achievements of mankind. Their myth is also a mirror of human transience. The fact that most miracles no longer exist has not made them weaker, but stronger. They show that size and duration are not the same thing. A monument can disappear, but its story endures when it is told. In this sense, the wonders of the world are not only buildings, but also stories that remind us that humanity has always strived for the immortal,
and yet never quite achieves it. After all, the legacy of the wonders of the world also lives within ourselves. Anyone who hears of them begins to dream of journeys to distant times, of cities full of splendor, of statues that touch the sky, and of gardens that bloom like paradises in the middle of the steppe. They stimulate our imagination and remind us that the past is more than just history. It is a reservoir of images, hopes, and longings that still shape us today. In the end, the 7 wonders of the world stand for what makes a human being: the urge to leave traces that are greater than himself. Some of these traces are made of stone, others of words, others of dreams. But they all contribute to the fact that we see ourselves as part of a long history that reaches far beyond our own time. The Pyramid of Giza still rises from the desert as the last living testimony of this era. But the truth is that all the wonders of the world continue to exist, not in walls or pillars, but in our memory, in our wonder, and in our desire to fill the world with wonders.